To create a really magical shift, we're going to be doing some underpainting. It's similar to a zenithal highlight, but instead it uses a little bit of colour theory. Because I want my wizard cloak to be purple, I will need to use the two colours that make purple underneath. So I'll be using red and blue. To start, I'm using Mephiston Red, which is a bright, true red. The red will make the purple lean pink, so I'm placing it where I want my highlights. To change colours with an airbrush, I flash it with boiling water. I personally find that boiling water runs clear quicker and more effectively than cold water. For the blue, I'm using Calidor's Sky. Similarly to the red, I'm placing this where I want my shadows to be. Once you've placed your undercoat where you like, it's time for purple. I'm using Xeris Purple. Holding the airbrush further away and applying lighter pressure than usual, I'm essentially applying an extra thin down layer of purple on top of the undercoat. This will change the colour, but still show the shading underneath due to its translucency. As this model is metal and the layers are extremely thin, I'm going over with both a gloss and matte varnish to prevent any chipping. For this, I'm using Vallejo Gloss Varnish and Green Stuff World's Max Matte. To thin your paint appropriately, you'll only need a small drop. I'm preparing my brush by dabbing a few drops of water onto a paper towel. Using a couple of drops of water, I'm mixing this into the paint and using the damp paper towel to wipe off the excess. To test consistency, I like to do a swatch on my thumb. It should be runny enough to go into the cracks of your knuckle, but thick enough it covers your skin. I'm starting off with Naggaroth Night to paint the shadows. You want to be following the indents of the fabric with the aim of fading it out where the fold gets wider at the bottom. Don't worry too much about harsh lines at the moment, as we will be going over it with other colours later down the line. I intend to keep these parts of the robe plain, so I'll go over all of these. Do the same for the hat. Here I'm going over the rim. Next, I'm going in with some super thin Calidor's Sky, and I'm pushing that back up from the bottom into the purple. Next, I'm mixing a tiny bit of Impish Rouge with Genestealer Purple. I'm going over the top edges of the cloak, trying to blend them down into the purple and blue. Once again, going back and forth with each colour. To give you a better idea of what I'm doing, you can see how I'm picking up each colour, applying it and changing to another colour to go over it quite quickly. I don't always rinse the brush when changing colours, and this is so I can mix it into a better transition colour. It is important to keep your paint very thin in order to keep the paint workable for longer and make the application much smoother on the model. Here I'm going over the side of the hat with both the blue and purple to create a gradient effect. I'll use Genestealer Purple on the other side of the hat. Next I'm going over the belt with Screamer Pink. To deepen the recesses I'm using Carroburg Crimson. And then brightening the edges with Corn Red. Moving on to the hair, I'm base coating this with light grey from Vallejo. To darken it down, I'm going over it with some Nuln Oil. Once those recesses are darker, I'm going back over the edges with light grey. Sometimes there are areas that are either not dark enough or not light enough. To tweak this, you can go over the areas required with a darker grey. For this, I'm using a little bit of black mixed with the grey I was using. Moving on to the skin, I'm starting off with some Mournfang Brown to cover the face and hands. To add some colour back into the skin, I'm using some Mephiston Red and placing this on the cheeks and tip of the nose. Unfortunately, I lost some footage, but I used Naggaroth Night mixed with Mournfang Brown for shadows, and I also mixed in some Kislev Flesh for the insides of the palms and other highlighted areas. Next, I started on the spellbook. For the cover, I used some Caliban Green and then went over it in some Dark Angels Green contrast. For an edge highlight, I mixed Caliban Green with some Warpstone Glow, and went around the rim of the cover, as well as the spine of the book. For the book pages, I base coated them in Wraithbone, and then went over it in Skeleton Horde. For spellbook symbols and scriptures, I like to use a Micron pen because it's easier to control. Alchemy symbols are great for spellbooks. The one I'm doing here is the symbol for Saturn. Once that's done, I'm base coating the rat with Dryad bark. I'm highlighting with Mournfang brown and going over the tail, feet and nose with Bugman's glow. For the tummy, I'm using Wraithbone. To finish the wizard off, I'm going over the whites of the eyes with Titanium white, and filling in the greens of the eyes with Warpstone glow. To protect the paint job whilst I do the base, I'm putting on another layer of gloss varnish. Because this model is made of metal, I had inserted 2 pins to secure it to the cork. I'm painting some white onto the ends of each pin, and then using that to mark where I want to drill into the base. Using a manual or electric pin vise, carefully drill 2 holes where you marked the base. Once your holes are made, insert the pins and bend them flat against the bottom of the base. To secure everything, I'm going around the edge with some super glue. To create a mud paste, mix some Dryad bark with gypsum plaster powder and apply this to the base with a spatula. I'm happy for mud to get onto the cloak as it adds a bit more realism and ties everything together nicely. It usually dries smooth, so to add texture, just stipple into it with an old brush. I'm using lots of grass tufts to create a wild grassland. I left a space in the corner for some red flowers which will tie in nicely to his belt. To add some definition to the grass, I'm dabbing around with some Agrax Earthshade, and then lightly dry brushing the tips with Wraithbone. To finish, I'm going over the rim of the base with Dryad bark. And then, to get rid of that shine, I'm using a matte varnish all over.